So I'm very excited to introduce our next guest. Iona Fox is the collections preparator at the Museum of Contemporary Art, or the MCA, in Chicago, where she was lucky enough to install the MCA's Chicago Comics Show in 2021. She also runs a DIY space called Grid Sport with her partner, where they host a weekly drawing night for Chicago cartoonists, plus occasional gallery shows and events. Her weekly comic strip almanac ran in 7 days alt-weekly newspaper from 2016 to 2019. And her most recent piece, Tough Shit, appeared in New City magazine this summer. Thank you, Iona.
Okay, I want to make sure everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Can anyone not hear me? I have a quiet voice, so I have to check. Thank you for coming. I'm Iona Fox, and this presentation is about the handling and care of physical art. I'm going to cover some simple and affordable ways to take care of your physical archive. I'm not going to cover a digital archive. Maybe that will be part 2 next year, because I know I at least need to learn more about that. And before I get started, I just wanted to say that I'm allowed to use a lot of photos from behind the scenes at the museum because this is like a professional institutional setting. But please don't take photos and post them to the internet and tag the MCA. This is kind of like a special allowance. So I just, if you could just be mindful of how you document this, that would be great. Thank you. So as I said, I'm the collections preparator at the MCA. This is basically what preparators do. We plan the practical back end of shows, and then we're responsible for installing them. We're the only people allowed to touch the art. Good union job in the arts, increasingly. This is a look at the MCA Comics Show from 2021. There were some loans from the Billy Ireland, but a lot of the art was entering an institutional setting for the first time. It came directly from the artists, or it came from people who'd bought minis or original pages. And that kind of underground and DIY aspect of comics is something a lot of us love. But there are some best practices that I thought maybe could be useful to people. So this talk was inspired by that. I'm gonna start with packing because that's kind of the longest topic. And then, so big picture, what is good packing? I'm going to demonstrate some techniques, but there are a million ways that are completely fine to pack your art. So if you sell original art or you send things through the mail, these are the overarching things you just want to keep in mind. Ideally, it's clear how to open it. Of course, we worry that it goes through the mail safely, but also you want the person opening it to open it safely, so that it's helpful if it's simple and labeled. It should be clear what's inside. You want a low risk of stray tape accidentally sticking to the art. Ideally, there are no residues on any of the materials you use, acid-free if possible. Cardboard or foam core are preferred materials. And then you want it to be weatherproof. And I would add clean materials to this list. The supplies needed are extremely basic. You need a knife of some kind, a box cutter or an X-Acto knife. I highly recommend you spend the $5 to get a pack of fresh blades. It'll just make this whole process very easy, much simpler. Then you want basic packing tape, blue painter's tape, a ruler, a Sharpie, basic printer paper, and cardboard or foam core. I also really suggest having some plastic that you can wrap the finished cardboard packaging in, or a large Ziploc bag. And then I also recommend you invest in some acid-free newsprint or glassine, and I'll talk more about that, but these two brands are both acid-free newsprint. They cost $6 to $8 for a pretty large size on Jerry's Art-A-Rama or Blick. So that, I think, is the most affordable acid-free option. So to pack a page of original art, you want 2 identical pieces of cardboard that are cut slightly larger than the artwork. I prefer like a 2-inch margin because you don't really need a huge margin. Like a smaller item is simpler to send. So I would say about 2 inches is ideal. This is something that an artist brought to us that I'm showing here just because that's really perfect. That's all you need. I used all new materials so that they would photograph really clearly. But this is perfect. Like the clean side of this box is on the inside, touching the art, and the printed side is on the outside. The cardboard's thick enough. That's great. I personally like to tape the edges of the cardboard. It's not something you need to do, but it just is kind of like a nice touch. And again, I used all high contrast colors just for like photographing purposes, but packing tape comes in every color. That's kind of your choice. Then the 2 pieces of cardboard you'll want to tape together because you're going to make a folder. And so you need to leave a small gap in the spine so that it can open nicely. You also want to be sure to tape both inside and outside the spine because of that gap. You don't want adhesive exposed. And then this is kind of where we're heading. We're going to make paper corners, and these are what you're going to tape to the cardboard. I'll show you 2 methods. There's the square method, which is possibly easier to remember. The square is just a mnemonic. It's just a way to remember what we're doing here. You just take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and fold it to square it off. Trim that excess. Then you'll fold that to make 4 smaller squares. Then you'll fold the corners into the center and cut diagonally into 2 triangles. And those, so each square is 2 triangles, and those are your paper corners. Okay. With this method, you just want to watch that seam. That's technically a tape risk. The tape would be on the face of the artwork, and so you just want to make sure that the seam is face down underneath the artwork. You can use corners on anything. You can use them to sort of make the corners of a comic book more rigid. They're really handy. The second method I personally prefer because the seam, I'll show you, the seam kind of overlaps and you don't have that gap. You just take another 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and fold it in thirds as though it's going in a business envelope. And then here's a visual demo. Fold a corner down, fold the other corner down from a point where the seam will now overlap. And then you just trim that excess there. And so these, technically, it would be fine if you tape these down the seam face up. This is just kind of a prepared or craftsmanship note. Some people with this style will do 2 seams face up and 2 face down because it's just easy to unfold 2 of the corners and the page slips out nicely. That's not necessary, it's just a little flourish. Okay, 2 things about tape. It's nice to use what we call courtesy tabs, which is when you fold a little bit of the tape underneath so it's easy to get your fingers under there. And you'd use these for anything that will be reopened or removed. I also think it sends a clear signal to the person unpacking, like, open here, remove this. Tape on tape is something you pair with courtesy tabs. If you lay packing tape down on the cardboard first, wherever you're going to tape something down that will be removed later, then when you remove that tape, it won't rip the cardboard and it just makes it reusable. Right, so tape on tape and courtesy tabs together are just nice and a clear signal. So then to close this folder, you're just going to use a short tape tab. If this tab is long, it risks curling over onto the face of the art once it's open. But if you keep it nice and short, it won't even be able to reach and it won't curl. And so here's a professional example. So this is what we're looking at for your folder. This is the inside and the outside. In art handling, we write face to indicate front and back to the person unpacking. That's really important for like paintings. It's less important for what we're doing here. The paper is just as safe upside down, but it does make unpacking clear and it's kind of professional, so you might like to add that. And so another view. For the final step, you'll want a protective sheet on the face of the art so it's not rubbing against the cardboard. Pictured here is a material called glassine. That's like an archival parchment paper. It's especially ideal for what we call friable materials. That's like pencil or chalk or charcoal, something that can move or rub. But you could use newsprint, that's also fine. Just use something. But you also will want to layer things if you're sticking multiple drawings on top of each other into this folder. So we talked about where to get the newsprint, but glassine is available from Gaylord Archival. They sell pretty large like sheets in packs of 25 for $21. And then you can also get a 300-foot roll if you only work in pencil and you love glassine, you can get a big roll for $45. So then you'd want to wrap this folder in plastic. For this, I mean, you can use a clean cut open garbage bag, or a large Ziploc bag. You can get poly plastic sheeting from like the paint section of Home Depot. You just want to make sure it's clean and doesn't have moisture in it. And then when you tape this, you just want to make sure it's something we call full seal, which just means like the full seam has been taped. You don't need a lot of tape. You just need one piece per seam. And you just want to watch out for this. That little bit there, I know it seems ridiculous, but it is technically a water risk. Even if a droplet like rolls in part way as you're unpacking, it's more likely to drop on the face. So if you go to all this trouble, you may as well just do it right. This is full seam. This is considered full seam. So here's some other examples. Just one piece of tape per seam is all you need. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
What exactly is the difference between this and the previous? Is it just that it's not sticking to the edges, or is there something special you did to the end of the tape to make it a proper sequel? Yeah.
Whoops. I don't know what is wrong with my thumb. It is just that I didn't do all the way. Yeah, I just thought it might be helpful to look at it again. Yeah, you can kind of see there.
It's just that it's not touching the edges.
Yeah, like there's a little bit left.
Folding lines or...
Yeah, exactly.
Also, you
Yeah.
run the risk of sticking unwanted particles, like
Mhm.
like dust, I guess. Since there's a little bit of
Yeah,
tape sticking out. So,
it's an access point for anything.
yeah.
It's finicky, but it's worth doing. Okay. So this is ready to send. I think it can be helpful to slap a label on there, especially if you used like an opaque garbage bag, just so people know what's inside. But this checks all the boxes. It's labeled, it's clear and easy to unpack. There's a low risk of damage while unpacking this. It's waterproof. There's a low risk of rubbing or smudging. And so you would now stick this in a bubble mailer, which are those envelopes that are lined in bubble, or a small box, and you would send it as a flat or a parcel, which I'll talk more about. And so here's a professional example. This is a small box. Last thing for packing, if you have like a huge stack of pages, or you have like a newspaper, or you're sending something dimensional, you would just add bumpers, which are just strips of the same material. I mean, here I switched to foam core just to mix it up. I have a little use my little pointer. This is the one I created, but this is a professional example. Let's see. Oh, it's not going forward again. Sorry. Well, I'll just talk. So you want to just make sure you leave room for fingers to tape and unpack this. In this example, they did a full perimeter and did like a big gap here. Again, I prefer like as small a package as possible. So I like to wrap things this way, where I have like a 1/4 inch margin here and I just leave the edges free to tape and untape. And that just helps you keep your package a little smaller. Thank you. Yeah, leave space for fingers. And then, you know, you'll just stick these down with double stick tape or artist tape, or honestly, anything is fine. And then with this style with bumpers, you actually don't make a full folder. You'll keep the 2 pages separate. And the reason is that you'd have to make a spine and it might not exactly match the height of the bumpers. And so it's just simpler to keep them separate and just tab them shut on all 4 sides. And I have examples of both of these. I brought them in so we can look at them at the end if you're curious. Oops, I'm getting my... So here's some professional examples of works with bumpers. Here's like a 3-layer sandwich. These are all kind of side by side and with a perimeter. This is foam. Museums often use foam because mostly we're not working with works on paper. We're working with big dimensional items. But I bet there are like 10 to 12 pages in this. This one I just put in because I thought it was kind of slick. Someone made a bumper that you flip like the page of a book. So this is closed and then you flip it open to reveal, and now you can like unpack. That's just a fancy example for inspiration. And then finally, here are some examples of how people have stacked pages of different sizes. I will say I think separate side by side is preferable to the big pile, but that's really fine too. These are all completely wrapped in glassine. So that's packing. That's what we have for packing. Storing work, I don't have much to say. We got, these works were stored in an envelope where the pages are a little bigger than the envelope. And so you get this kind of fade line. And it's not really a big deal on these works because it's on the margin, but I just want to point out, you want to make sure you're not getting these fade lines like right across the face of your artwork, like smack in the middle. So if things are in the light, you just, ideally they fade evenly. And then this spine on the right has been in my very sunny studio for 2 years, and the spine on the left has lived in a box in the dark. I thought it'd be interesting just to see how non-acid-free material ages. These are mostly from like non-archival glues. This is non-archival, I think this is newspaper. Whiteout, this is gonna be tape. We all do it. It's, you know, you really see it on like newspaper cartoonists who just had to pump out so much stuff. But this is just so you could see how it ages, so you could just know. This image I pulled from a conservation website. This mat board is not acid-free, and so it's leaching into the work over time. And just to note that cardboard is acidic, and acid, like over time, it can still leak through glassine. So for long-term storage, I would say that acid-free foam core is the economical solution there. Yeah, yes. So hopefully I'm not making you stressed out. Protecting from moisture and light are the most important because those changes happen the most quickly. Acid damage is a lot slower. Handling work, I thought it could be interesting to know that in a museum setting, technically, the way you would handle works on paper is by holding two opposite corners of the page, because then you're guaranteed not to create a crease. And we often use gloves for most work, but with paper, we just use clean, dry hands so that you can have that feedback and really understand like how you're handling something. Just a note. Okay, shipping. You really can use whatever carrier you're familiar with. I screenshotted a bunch of common ones so you can just kind of look at their interfaces. I'll save you some Google searches. I will say that UPS, they seem to have the least amount of information on their site. They are the closest store to us, so I actually use UPS, but this was like the most extensive information I could find. FedEx seemed to possibly have the largest mailers available at the time that I looked, and USPS had a lot of helpful information. And then there's also like DHL, there's all kinds of, it's up to you. If you have something in a bubble mailer, it's considered a flat. You're sending it as a flat. If you have a small box like these on the right, these are parcels. So for the sizing, I really recommend thinking first about what size mailer or box you want to aim for, because you know the size of your artwork. And then maybe with your folder, you might want to make a 3-inch margin or a 1.5-inch margin, and then it'll fit perfectly in the box or the mailer. And of course, leave a little wiggle room so that it can slide in. And of course, you can make your own bubble mailer. If you just wrap your folder in bubble and then in brown paper or put it in your own box. You just have to measure and check the carrier guidelines. So I do think it's probably easier to just use the carrier's packaging. I think it's probably a better deal, and it's definitely less admin, but you can do it either way. And here are just some examples of things that came in. It says like the egg carton padding. This was somebody made their own mailer. You can think about if you want to request a signature. I think the benefit to that is that then you know it won't sit out in the rain on a day like this. But luckily you made it waterproof, so hopefully it should be fine. And I know these are easy steps to skip, but I think it's worthwhile to double check the address, let the person know, hey, I just put it in the mail, and give them the tracking number. Oh, and then, so here is a packed work that we're unpacking step by step. These people, this is like 3 stacked pieces of foam core. These guys packed it with pieces of birch plywood on top of the foam core, on top and bottom. That's awesome. That's gonna be very safe, very stiff. It's also gonna be really heavy and expensive. So you could use like thin particle board or extra cardboard. That would definitely be recommended. And if you're putting something in a box, you definitely want to make sure that you have some kind of stuffing so it's not jostling around. Okay, installing, last item. So what is good installation? It's minimally invasive. It doesn't leave any trace on the artwork. So no marks, no dents, no new holes, no adhesive left over, and simple is always good. I'm gonna cover 3 pretty simple techniques. There's screw and magnet, which is what is pictured here. There's L hooks and plexi sandwich. So for screw and magnet, you just need screws, a screwdriver, or a drill, and magnets. The screws, you Ideally, they would be very short, like a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch, because you don't need to screw them deep into the wall. They're not really taking weight. But a short but thick screw is like ideal, because a screw with some girth, there'll just be more contact with the magnet. And then for magnets, I got these from McMaster-Carr, if you're familiar with that website. These are about 70 cents a piece, so I am sure you can get cheaper than that. But with McMaster-Carr, I like it because you can get extremely specific about the size, the shape, the quantity. You just know exactly what's coming. And so then the screw goes, and suggested, sorry. I also suggest artist tape, adhesive backed felt, which you can get just by typing those exact words into Google, and a million results will come up, and a hole punch, and I'll explain. The screw goes directly into the wall. This is a dramatic depiction, you know. And then a tiny tab of artist tape will go over the head of the screw. That's just an archival covering to the screw, because it'll come in contact with the artwork. You can skip this step, but you know. And then the magnet pins the page to the screw. Yeah.
I was worried because I was worried you put the whole yard. It was just
No. Yeah.
Okay,
You just have,
okay.
yeah. And so you would do this on all 4 corners.
Okay.
I think this is by far the simplest and cheapest way to install
Okay.
original pages. And then I really like to add felt to the magnet to protect the face of the artwork, just on the side that will come in contact with it. These are the materials that we used in the comics show. What made it easier for us is if you get a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch magnets, that matches exactly the size of a hole punch, and that will just make that whole process pretty simple. These images are from the MCA show, and here you can see that the magnets are really right on the face of the artwork, so the felt is doing good work there. I mean, it's probably less important here, but it's just, it's a nice addition. The MCA actually ended up, originally they were gonna do screw and magnet, but they ended up using magnets on metal wall cases and metal tables. That show also came on the tail of the pandemic, so there were a lot of surprises leading up and a lot of budget cuts. A lot of cartoonists who were supposed to be in the show actually got dropped for budget reasons. Everything just got really pared down. So we, at our place Gridsport, we hosted a satellite show of all the work that had gotten cut. And we had a big opening for the comics community, pictured here, and we did use magnets and screws for this show. So here we are laying out with blue tape where the work will go, so we know where to put the screws. And you can just kind of see what that looks like. This is actually from a different comics show we had later on, but it's just kind of, you know, you can see kind of from a distance what that looks like on the wall. So L hooks, all you need are L hooks. You can get them in a huge variety of sizes, and a drill and a pilot bit. And again, you have the option to put artist tape on these L hooks if you want like an archival surface. L hooks are really useful for thicker items like books or sketchbooks if you want to install those on the wall, pictured here. All you do is pick a pilot bit that matches the L hook girth, pre-drill a hole in the wall, and you just twist the L hook in by hand. You're gonna twist it in to the wall as deep or as shallow as you need, but just make sure that you leave like a little breathing room so you don't dig into the piece, like just a hair. And finally, plexi sandwich. All you need is Scotch tape, foam core, and a kind of thick enough plexi that it won't bend. Usually I'd say like 1/2 inch maybe. This is the Chris Ware part of the MCA show. We did all, his work was in plexi sandwiches. I think it's nice because it's really unobtrusive. Like you really are just looking at the original page. It's completely invisible. It's definitely more expensive than screw and magnet, but I think it's possibly cheaper than framing, depending on how you go about framing. It's a little more time intensive because you have to assemble the sandwiches, but it works like long term as framing does. And you can also use UV filtering plexi, which is great. You would install these using L hooks. So to make these, the plexi and the foam core are sized a hair larger than the page. And I'm talking like a 1/16 of an inch. You don't really want to see a border. It's just to accommodate for like any cutting irregularities in the foam core and the plexi to make sure the page is really inside. Because if you had a real margin, then you'd have to figure out a way to center the page in that sandwich so it doesn't like slip down. Then you sandwich the comics page and you literally tape this together around the edge with clear tape. It's very simple. Here my bangs are like flying through time and sticking to the plexi. I remember that clearly. And then this is what it looks like installed with the L hooks. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to take questions. Here's my email. Feel free to email me at any time with questions. I interviewed 3 people for this. I don't know a lot about the shipping aspect, so I interviewed the senior registrar at the MCA, Emily Patrick. My friend Sean made this video to the right of how he likes to pack his drawings. And then Sean Watkins of Athenium Comics Art also answered some questions. So, yeah. So thank you. So does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I wonder if you know what it is in the cardboard that makes it acidic. Who's putting acid in cardboard? where does the acid come from?
I don't know a lot about that.
It's from the wool pulp.
Okay.
This one has what's called tannic acid. That's what causes
Thank you.
it.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I've experienced some galleries that will not let you use screws. So I assume nails would be the next step, and then I guess that would include framing and everything. My question is, how do you, as far as like framing and having a mat,
Yeah.
how do you mount your artwork? Maybe this is too big of a question.
If you have a mat,
Yeah.
I think so. At that point, well, 2 things. Using nails instead of screws sounds kind of wild to me because they're much harder to remove. But unless you're using like florets with tiny nails, like a bunch of tiny nails that leave very small holes, like you could almost not even see them. But at that point, you really kind of need a frame to install that way. With a mat, I think with a big enough magnet, like this is not too many slides back, so I'm gonna head back to the Gridsport show. Yeah. These Jeffrey Brown pieces are on pretty thick illustration board, and we hung them using screw and magnet with no problem. But I think I did use a slightly bigger magnet, so it would just have more power. So I guess that would be an option. Yeah. Mhm.
Is the felt on the magnet, if you said this, I'm so sorry, I might have
Yeah.
missed it. Is the felt on the magnet just to help protect the art from the metal on the magnet, or was it also to help dull the power of the magnet to make it easier to remove?
It's to protect the artwork, and I also think it helps avoid possible indentation over time.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I think the artist tape actually helps with that a little bit too, so you don't get like the screw head
Like on the back.
imprint. Yeah.
That makes sense.
So
you talked about storing artwork and installation. Is there any special attention you have to pay to the environment in which you're storing it or installing it to prevent damage?
Yeah, I mean, dark and dry is ideal. At the museum, we keep everything temperature controlled at like, I think it's like 60 or 70% humidity or something like that. And it's very pleasant as a human to walk into these spaces. It's like whatever feels good to us is good for art too. I sometimes like, I have shelves that I've installed little curtains over, you know, just to contribute to a darker environment. So, yeah.
When you're setting up the MCA show,
Yeah.
you were saying you got a lot of the artworks directly from the artists.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if like part of the idea behind the talk was that there were like little standards for the shipping, and like if you had to deal with like a lot of different strategies, and if you like had trouble like hanging stuff because of those standards, or
Yeah, I wouldn't say we had trouble hanging things. I think seeing like the wide range just made me think maybe it would be useful to show some tips. Like nothing came in damaged or anything like that. But, you know, it was all over the map, like how people were bringing it in. So that did inspire the talk, yeah.
Have you ever had to store, I guess, like large numbers of some of these pieces of original art that maybe didn't get either they belong in your archives or they didn't get shipped back to the other artists? And if you have, how did you handle storing, I guess, like multiple pieces of art without just having like rows and rows and rows and rows of cardboard taking up so much
Yeah.
space?
So at the museum, we don't have a lot of comic art, but we have a lot of works on paper. And a lot of them get stored in flat files is the preferred method there.
Flat files like
Those drawers that are really skinny.
like
Yeah.
they have like architectural
Yeah, or
stuff.
like, you know, like at art schools, you see them. They're really expensive typically, but they're also something that schools are constantly unloading in large numbers. So if you like kind of make it your mission to acquire used flat files and kind of keep your eye out for like 6 months, you can usually get some.
That's good.
But buying them new is like not a small thing. Yeah, and then I'll say about flat files too, they're really annoying to move. So
Yes.
I put
Found it.
I put mine on caster wheels, those wheels that can lock. I just drilled them to like a small piece of wood and drilled that wood into the bottom of the frame, and that's made my life much easier.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
I would say to follow up on that, are you putting Vaseline between each paper pieces?
Yes.
And is the museum ever using actual, boxes? There's like archival boxes.
Yes.
That kind of replace the idea of having those boxes. Take boxes, put them in places, stack, dinner fits your books with Vaseline.
Absolutely. Like with a museum budget, I mean, this has been way scaled down for like a personal budget. We do have all kinds of like archival, like briefcases and Solander boxes and stuff like that. Everything's separated by glassine. But that starts to get pretty big budget pretty fast. So thank you for coming. If you want to look at the stuff up here, I have the screws, I have the magnets.